During Tea and Transport Evolved News episode 574, I covered a news story that suggested the world's largest manufacturer of electric vehicles, BYD, was considering utilising its sizable wealth to circumnavigate current regulatory hurdles, preventing it from selling cars to customers in the US. That circumnavigation to find a struggling legacy US automaker, buy it outright, and then use its brand recognition, factories, and employees to bring BYD's EV range to the US, bypassing not only import tariffs and Chinese market restrictions, but providing Americans access to the technology that helped BYD become a global leader through a familiar local nameplate. And it's no secret that the US's three largest automakers are currently finding times a little tough, and previous sales of European brands to Chinese automakers has given those brands a lease of new life. But could BYD actually buy out one of the Detroit Three? Or perhaps a smaller, lesser-known marque? Would it be allowed to execute the sale, or would it be stopped dead in its tracks? And what would such a future look like? Today I'm going to go through some hypotheticals to find out. To examine this hypothetical, I'm going to Rachel Maddow the shit out of this video and provide some background context. I know, not everyone likes this, so feel free to skip to the "yeah, but can they do it" bit of the video. For everyone else, though, let's remind ourselves of the history to this point. The global auto industry is going through a period of flux. Interest in EVs is growing in many markets as tighter emissions regulations encourage both automakers and consumers to invest in EVs. And although some of that regulation is being softened as automaker lobbyist dollars convince legislators of a pending auto industry collapse if car companies aren't allowed to keep suck, squeeze, bang, blow around, the trend towards a cleaner future is clearly visible. Automakers who once scoffed at the idea of electric are introducing more models to their lineup, inviting in electric vehicle production and, in some cases, even pairing up with their rivals in the space to develop joint platforms to lower development costs. But all of these development costs are making themselves known in quarterly balance sheets, especially for automakers who were late to spin up EV investment in the first place. In the US, a different story is playing out. Automakers who, in Europe, are launching more electric models are, across the US and much of North America, confirming a pullback away from EVs. They blame consumers, the expense of developing EVs, cost margins, and they seemingly luxuriate in the rollback of emissions protections and fuel economy targets carried out by the very occupant of the White House they helped to get elected. In just the first 3 months of this year, we've seen more than a half dozen US EV models removed from sale, and at the end of last year, even bestsellers like the Ford F-150 Lightning were cancelled. Because sales? The White House itself, run by a man known for his hatred of renewable energy in all its forms, electric vehicles, and anything that isn't powered by coal or oil, claims that the rollback in regulations is being done to put the consumer first, to lower prices, and to bring about a new age of prosperity. But as anyone who has purchased a new car in the last few years will tell you, that conceit is clearly flawed. The average price of a new vehicle in America has risen 30% in 5 years, crossing $50,000 for the first time ever and outpacing overall inflation by a margin wide enough to drive a fleet of cancelled Acura ZDXs, Genesis electrified G80s, Nissan Ariya, Hyundai Ioniq 6, Volvo EX30, Acura RSX, Ram 1500 REV, Kia EV6 GT, and many more straight through. And that's only a selection of the vehicles cancelled because of market changes. A euphemism that we all know is actually because we don't want to and the White House says we don't have to, since the very start of this year. All of these cancellations, as we've surmised already, are symptomatic of short-sightedness on the part of automakers. Automakers eager to keep their balance sheets positive and their dealerships happy. After all, in an age where the White House views financial wealth and military might as the only true measure of success, companies are being encouraged to chase profit at all costs. In a protected marketplace like the US, that plan can indeed lead to short-term gain. It can meet the needs of the White House while remaining protected from the EV revolution overseas. And the US government, for nearly half a century, has done everything it can do to protect the domestic auto industry from overseas threats. The threat used to be cheap Japanese pickup trucks and fuel-efficient city runabouts. Now it's cheap electric vehicles from China. Prior to President Trump's much maligned, economically questionable tariff war, a tariff war that not only appears arbitrary and capricious in its execution, but seemingly seeks out nations that have drawn his personal ire for extra punishment, Canada and the US's longtime trade partners and allies kept lockstep with each other on policies designed to protect the North American automotive marketplace. Canada and the US worked together on policy, planning and execution. Automakers operated factories both north and south of the 49th parallel, and it wasn't unusual for a vehicle or its parts to cross the Canadian-US border multiple times before it rolled off the production line as a finished vehicle. But that was then, and this is now, an age where the US is visibly hostile towards Canada, where Canadians legally in the US are frequently caught up in immigration enforcement that's claimed by the White House to be targeting the worst of the worst. And where trade partnerships are breaking down, Canada has put its elbows up and gone it alone. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Carney visited China, where he signed an historic deal with President Xi Jinping on trade and cooperation, covering everything from Chinese import tariffs on canola, lobster, and Canadian agricultural exports to Chinese EV imports to Canada. Instead of the 100% tariffs on Chinese-made vehicles that Canada had previously held in line with US policy, Canada agreed with China on a new, lower tariff of 6.1% on Chinese-made EVs, an initial yearly quota of 49,000 EVs per year, expected to expand to 70,000 EVs by 2030, and a requirement that at least one half of all EVs imported from China to Canada by 2030 must have a sticker price under 35,000 Canadian dollars. The US, meanwhile, under President Trump, there's still an effective ban on all Chinese-made EVs and automotive parts into the US. Import tariffs are still massive, and in a marketplace where automakers are reticent to make EVs when their chosen president wants them to make gas-guzzling SUVs and pickups, and is happily providing tax breaks to Americans who buy such vehicles, the EV market is open for those willing to enter it. The US government has intentionally castrated the US EV market. Automakers have, by and large, complied with that goal, and even America's homegrown electric automaker, Tesla, is suffering the consequences of that, along with the inevitable backlash that occurs when a company's CEO overtly supports anti-immigrant, anti-diversity candidates that embrace the kind of far-right ethno-nationalistic policies that have alienated exactly the progressive tech-forward consumers who helped build the brand in the very first place. And yes, I'm aware that there are plenty of people who still drive Teslas and always will, and historically, the majority did lean more liberal than conservative, however narrowly. But that's shifting fast. Today, Tesla has become toxic to buyers across the political spectrum, and the Conservatives now flying the Tesla flag are, ironically, far less likely to actually buy one than the progressives they replaced. Yet, as many a survey over the last 12 months has shown, once you go EV, you don't want to drive an ICE vehicle again. Study after study backs this up. J.D. Power's 2026 EV ownership study, for example, found that 96% of current EV owners would choose electric again, with satisfaction at an all-time high. Even the charging infrastructure concern, a long-time barrier to mainstream adoption, is improving. In that very same study, failed public charging attempts hit their lowest level in 4 years in 2025, and fast charging infrastructure expanded 30% in the US alone. The problems are being solved. The product was never the issue. And as the price of gasoline soars thanks to the US-Iran war, more and more consumers are looking to EVs as a potential way to avoid bleeding money every time they commute to work. The market is there. People want affordable EVs. Detroit and the North American auto industry as a whole just isn't making them. And that's where EVs come in, specifically Chinese-made EVs. Because of economies of scale and time in the market, BYD has been making EVs for more than 15 years now. BYD is, by volume, the world's largest electric automaker. It can produce vehicles at lower costs, has vertically integrated its supply chains to encompass everything from raw material extraction to refinement, cell production and vehicle production, and also operates its own battery swap and charging networks. It no longer dominates the Chinese market. As of the end of February this year, its export market eclipsed its domestic sales, but it has dramatically grown its influence elsewhere in the world. This year, the company aims to export 1.3 million EVs around the world, which is up 24% on its 2025 target. In fact, there are few parts of the world where BYD doesn't sell some kind of electric vehicle. Even in the US, where its passenger cars aren't sold, it makes and sells electric buses and trucks domestically for the US market. Remember this fact because it's going to be important later on. Just like Toyota in the 1980s and Kia in the 1990s, BYD has quickly assumed a dominant position in the global automotive marketplace. That position means it is printing money, and it has money to burn at a time when most legacy automakers, especially those in Europe and North America, are breaking out into cold sweats over their balance sheets. Whereas legacy automakers are cancelling EV programs, reabsorbing EV and autonomous vehicle subsidiaries, and rethinking new models ostensibly out of a need to restructure and align with their corporate goals with market realities, BYD is buying everyone a drink at the bar by buying the bar. And if you'd like receipts, who wouldn't? Let's go there. Through the first 3 quarters of last year, BYD hasn't published its year ends yet. BYD hit $79.5 billion in revenue, up 13% year over year for the same period. And its interest-bearing debt, that sat at 4.9% of its total liabilities, one of the lowest ratios in the entire global auto industry. Meanwhile, in the same 3 quarters of last year, the Detroit 3, GM, Ford and Stellantis saw far less favourable numbers. In Q3, Ford's Model E division, while showing shrinking losses, was still losing money at a negative 79% margin. Stellantis recorded billions of dollars in losses, and GM, while profitable, was only so because of its truck division. On paper, these automakers claim that it was because of EVs, but the cold, hard reality is that much of their losses, which dramatically widened for Ford and Stellantis in Q4 with massive losses recorded, were down to record-breaking recall campaigns, the loss of EV tax credits, and a propensity to make vehicles with sticker prices well above the average means of most car buyers. I mean, there's a reason why auto loan defaults are on the rise, why 7 or even 8-year auto loans are ballooning in popularity, and why the average transaction price, or ATP, of new cars is going up. EVs are being blamed for the rise in total vehicle price, but the reality is that fewer and fewer low-end budget models are being made. Entire model families are being gutted that once provided affordable, reliable motoring for first-time buyers, while models kept around are seeing their starting prices rise as in-car tech, telematics, and semi-autonomous driver assistance that many drivers don't actually want are being included as standard. And as for inflation, don't get me started. The median household income in America is around $75,000. The average new car now costs over $50,000. You do the maths. So far, I've highlighted the issues regarding the US marketplace, the lack of affordable models, the systemic cull of EVs as a president who hates them does everything he can to encourage the burning of fossil fuels in preference to more sustainable forms of energy, and a market that outside of the US is generally pushing towards an EV future. If EVs are a great way for the average person to save money as oil prices soar, if EVs are a way to lower overall transportation emissions, and if every other market in the world is moving that way, but US companies that, by the way, are by and large in financial difficulties, refuse to make, there is an in for a firm like BYD to take advantage. Stella Lee, Executive Vice President of BYD Company Limited and President of BYD Americas, the executive who established BYD's European headquarters in Rotterdam and its first North American base in Chicago, recently signalled in an interview that BYD is actively evaluating the possibility of circumventing current US tariffs and embargoes by acquiring a US automaker outright. Her words are characteristically careful that BYD is, quote, open to every opportunity, end quote, and is currently evaluating potential assets. But from a senior executive at the world's largest EV maker, a deliberate non-denial is a story in of itself. It's also a massive move from the statement she made 1 year earlier, in which she said BYD was not planning on coming to the US to sell EVs there. And in between me filming and us publishing this video, we learned that BYD and other companies are exploring the options of establishing dealerships in Canada. What a difference a year makes. On paper, this all seems like the perfect gambit. Unlike BYD, with its substantial cash flow, secured mining rights, and vertical integration, legacy automakers are cash poor, resource poor, and frankly lacking in EV expertise. That's not to say there aren't any good EVs out there. GM's new Chevrolet Bolt EV is a prime example of excellent engineering done right at the right price. Though it's also a vehicle the brand has acknowledged will have a very limited real-world production life cycle. If you haven't watched my review of it yet, by the way, it's well worth adding to your up next choices on the channel. And while we're at it, it's worth noting too that its LFP battery cells are supplied by a Chinese manufacturer, despite GM once investing billions to build US battery plants with LG Energy Solutions, plants now being sold off and repurposed to make batteries for data centers rather than cars. It's an irony that I hope won't be lost on anyone paying attention to this video. And the others? Well, the Ford F-150 Lightning was, and I'd argue as an owner still is, an excellent example of what a work-ready electric truck could offer. And despite its technical teething problems, the Dodge Charger Daytona is a real looker for anyone who wants muscle car goodness. Detroit is, and always has been, capable of delivering the goods. Politics, money, and perhaps a touch of the "that's not how we do it here" has ensured board members and shareholders have neutered any attempts to do so. But BYD has the financial wherewithal to make an acquisition a possibility. It has the in-house technology and economies of scale to obliterate the competition should it so wish, and it's actively considering the option. But is it actually possible? The history books say yes. In fact, it's not a simple yes, but a resounding yes. Geely, one of the world's largest automakers, has already done what BYD is apparently considering. In the last decade, it's acquired multiple European brands, including Volvo, Polestar, and Lotus. The nuances are important. Volvo is 100% owned by Geely. Polestar wasn't acquired per se, but Geely is a significant shareholder in the brand, and it recently bought out Volvo's share of ownership. It's also the controlling shareholder now, but Polestar is publicly traded and operates on a different organisational structure to more traditional automotive brands. And Lotus, from my home country of the UK and home county of Norfolk? Well, Geely became a majority shareholder in the brand back in 2017 and then fully acquired the brand last year. These smaller volume automakers gained access to Geely's shared platforms. They gained access to its own battery supplies and engineering teams. And while Volvo and Polestar very much operate as their own entities, as I expect Lotus does too, they are all now part of a larger parent group. And look, I know it's not been plain sailing. Geely has used some pretty creative accounting over the last few years to shuffle ownership between itself and its subsidiaries to ensure compliance with various regulatory requirements around the world. But at the end of the day, each of those brands sit under the Geely banner. They benefit from it, and they are in some ways still around because of it. And while the European arm of Stellantis, which has a 20% share in Chinese automaker Leapmotor, is not owned by a Chinese brand, its cementing of partnerships and merger with Chrysler Fiat not so long ago has helped it become a more immovable object in the auto space. It's not Chinese owned, but Chinese automakers have most certainly helped its European EV portfolio grow. So much so that Stellantis is considering using just Leapmotor components and engineering for future EV models rather than using its own in-house engineering teams. But those Geely-owned brands, Volvo, Polestar, Lotus, they're just some of the brands whose dealerships have actively used their historical brand identity to convince customers, mainly in Europe, that buying a Chinese-made, Chinese-designed EV is okay. And that's the playbook BYD is likely going to want to copy. So, where are we right now? Legacy US automakers are genuinely having a bad financial time right now. They are also a bit pants, British term, at the whole affordable, desirable, sensibly sized EV thing. Chinese automakers, meanwhile, are already proving extremely good at that very same thing. BYD has a massive market share in other parts of the world. In Central and South America, for example, Chinese brands account for over 85% of all EVs sold, and in Uruguay, BYD's market share is an astonishing 90% of all EVs sold. This January in Australia, a market that currently does not impose restrictive tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, BYD outsold Tesla by a factor of 10. And BYD does genuinely appear keen to acquire a North American automaker. But I'm sorry to say that on paper and in reality are very different. And for an illustration of that, we need to look at TikTok. As anyone who's followed the news in recent years will know, the US federal government takes a very dim attitude towards companies that are partly or wholly owned by Chinese entities, partly because of the usual involvement in those companies by the Chinese government. Okay, I know this video is long, and I'm trying really hard to be super accurate on this, but as with so many things, geopolitics changes on a daily basis, and so I have to go with what's correct as of the time of filming, with historical context as appropriate. I'm going to do my best, but I am not an economist or a political major, so please bear with me. Many people like to claim that the majority of Chinese firms are required to be at least partially owned by the Chinese government, making them state-owned enterprises, or SOEs. And I want to remind folks here that most countries around the world have at least some SOEs, either partly or wholly owned by their local governments. They exist in Europe, North America, pretty much every country has some. But China has the highest number of SOEs right now, with a 2022 Stanford University study calculating that around 363,000 firms in China were fully state-owned, 629,000 firms were 30% state-owned, and nearly 867,000 firms had some form of state ownership. Interestingly, though, and few people note this, Chinese state ownership has fallen in recent years, while local regional government ownership has grown. And while BYD is a publicly traded company with its key owner and founder, Wang Shangfu, owning 17.6% of the company, Lu Xingxiang, company co-founder and cousin of Wang Shangfu, owning 13.5%, and Yongye Investment owning a further 5.3%, BYD does benefit from both state and local subsidies and financial support as well. And technically, the Chinese government currently has a 2 to 3% shareholding in BYD through various funds. And yes, Berkshire Hathaway used to own a share in BYD, but it sold it last year for an astonishing 3,890% return on investment. Current US regulations in the form of the Foreign Investment Risk Review Modernization Act of 2018, as overseen by the Committee of Foreign Investment in the United States, take a kind of dim view, both in terms of national security and financial stability, of any Chinese-owned company with sizable connections to the People's Republic of China acquiring a US company or even dominating a US market segment. As Berkshire Hathaway shows, the inverse is less troubling to the feds, but I expect it did keep close tabs on that particular investment. So how does this rule apply to BYD? Well, let's look at the TikTok example, as it's the best known case of this in practice. Not so long ago, the US federal government basically told TikTok's parent company, a Chinese entity, that it needed to sell TikTok to a US entity or face being banned. The solution, though, wasn't very clean. TikTok was spun off into a new entity that was 19.9% minority owned by its original Chinese owner, ByteDance, with Oracle, Silver Lake and MGX taking up 45% ownership, and the rest of the ownership coming from existing ByteDance investors. Now, the federal government may have initially wanted a full divestment, but what it got instead was a compromise, which, by the way, I also want you to remember for later in this video. A compromise that involved some kind of Chinese influence. In the same way, those same policy and national security wonks that were upset about TikTok warn that a Chinese automaker entering into the automotive marketplace would embed a potentially hostile actor inside of America's infrastructure, that vehicles would phone home to the PRC with sensitive data about their owners' locations and movement, that bad actors in China would gain access to secretive data that could be used to give China an unfair advantage in the marketplace at best, or a military upper hand at worst. I know this side is going to upset some, but, well, here goes. I think it's kind of ironic that the US government is so upset about the potential for Chinese companies spying on American citizens when the American government itself is doing that right now. In fact, in just the last few months, the FBI has upped its spending on technology platforms that provide explicit and intimate data on the whereabouts of most Americans through warrantless means, i.e., by buying data from companies like your mobile phone provider, ISP, and in-car telematics systems to allow the government to know your movements more accurately than ever before.
Who is it?
Wilderness girls.
A little late to be selling cookies.
Troop leader says we are not meeting our quota.
And that's before we even get into the whole messy world of always-on Ring doorbells selling every pixel of your personal front door camera to law enforcement via Flock. There is a reason that my own home security system records locally and doesn't go to the cloud. Amidst all of that, it's facetious to expect that any purported Chinese spying is somehow wrong, but I'm also on the side of my face, my choice about when you collect data about it. And I also know that Chinese companies and the Chinese government aren't free from guilt. China is known for some really horrific human rights violations. The treatment of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, the treatment of journalists and political opponents of the ruling party, and most recently, allegations that BYD itself faced over ties to forced labour and slave-like conditions in factories it either operated or sourced components from in both China and South America. But then, other firms were also implicated of similar behaviour in China by investigations from the Human Rights Watch. These include GM, Toyota, Volkswagen and Tesla. And that doesn't make any of it right, but just as we did with Dieselgate over a decade ago, if we're accusing one firm of wrongdoing in China, we need to make sure that all of the firms that stand accused are mentioned. So, congratulations, we've reached the crux of the video. An auto industry in the US in dire straits, a neighbour to the north who is more than happy to cut the crud from the US and deal with China directly, and an environment where a company with significant economies of scale stands to benefit if only it can make it into the marketplace. Could BYD legitimately purchase a legacy US automaker? The answer is complicated. We could call it a no but or a yes but, depending on your preferences. So I'm going to explain. Outright purchase of a US marque like Dodge or Chrysler or Ram or Chevrolet is more likely than an outright purchase of an entire automotive brand, i.e. Stellantis or GM. And Ford, I should note here, is, according to various sources, already engaged in multiple different talks with Chinese brands about future collaborations. Even in that space, however, I don't see a full and total acquisition of an entire automotive brand. I mean, for a start, I don't think the federal government will allow it. Despite your feelings on the Detroit 3, and boy, have I learned living here for 11 years that all of you Americans have some very strong feelings on them. Each of the big brands are loyally followed and celebrated in their own way, and admittedly, often not by the same people, but they are, and there's a lot of national pride in them. More likely, I suspect, would be a hybrid option in which an existing badge is acquired or jointly operated through a new partnership between BYD and a legacy brand. While a Stellantis or a Ford or a GM-owned badge is possible, they have brands that they no longer actively make or are in need of a reimagining with an electric heart. I also want to highlight one brand in particular that stands out to me even more: Scout. The Volkswagen-owned, already struggling plug-in adventure brand that's yet to bring a model to market would be an excellent contender for this. And while Volkswagen itself isn't an American brand, Scout is, which would technically tickle those boxes. It's small enough to be an affordable acquisition or merged partnership, and it's also small enough to fly under the hawkish eyesight of some of the wonks. It's already pushed back production plans. It's already $1 billion over budget, and the earliest we can expect to see a model from the company is summer 2028. It was originally promised with electric and plug-in hybrid variants, but it's pretty much given up on the EV thing. BYD could help reverse that. Hang on, but could it? See, at the risk of second-guessing myself, a rugged, outdoor adventure brand might look good on the balance sheet for a company like BYD, especially if it's looking to expand its portfolio, because it doesn't have anything like Scout in its lineup right now. But it's also not exactly evocative of everyday affordable motoring. So which brands are? Well, how about Saturn?
The Saturn Ion, with dent-resistant side panels.
Or Pontiac?
With the power of fuel-injected multi-valve engines, the security of anti-lock braking systems, the agility of four-wheel independent suspensions, this is advanced Pontiac technology for the 90s.
Or perhaps even Daewoo.
The Daewoo Lanos is not only a safe car to drive, with standard features like ABS and dual airbags, it's also a fun car to drive.
All of those brands, officially still part of the GM library, all speak to more affordable, everyday motoring. And in the same way, Ford has Mercury, and if you're continuing along Ford's penchant for bringing back names after they died a long time ago, as it has multiple times, how about Merkur? And how about Stellantis? Well, it has Plymouth, Eagle, Chrysler. Yeah, I know Chrysler's still around, but it's just one vehicle. I mean, imagine a range of small, affordable EVs built on any of those nameplates. All electric motoring in the US and Canada and Mexico, built around BYD technology. For any of those, buying an extinct or nearly extinct nameplate, then offering their original parent company enough of a shareholding to keep US regulators happy, would be the big golden ticket for BYD as it enters the US marketplace. and the partner brands, the original legacy owners of those brands, they get the kudos of making EVs they don't actually make or want to make, and the ability to carry on regardless with their heavily polluting models for just a little longer, until at least the US government is under a different set of leaders. And you know, I think that's what's going to happen. We just have to see which brand gets picked and when. So maybe there's hope for EVs in the US after all. Thanks for watching to the end. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments if you'd ever buy a Chinese-made EV if you live in North America, and which legacy brand you think would either partner with or be acquired in the near or far future to bring Chinese EVs to the US. We are 100% independent, and if you'd like to help us stay that way, there's a link in our show notes to support us on Patreon from $1.50 a month, so you can join the amazing list of channel supporters right here. You can also send us money on Ko-fi, buy some swag from our swag store, like this phenomenal t-shirt, and you can also send us an old-fashioned check. And please hit subscribe after you're done watching this video. YouTube won't reliably tell you that we've pushed a new video though, so also make sure you follow us on social media or join our Discord chat room. Thanks for watching, thanks for helping be the positive change that we need to see in the world, and until next time, keep evolving!